Hi there, this is Michael Bovey with Consumer Recovery Network, and I'm back for another episode of T-Shirt Tuesday. I'm going to keep up on the Tuesday moniker because we tend to do these things on in just about any day of the week. And today, I want to thank Charles Thalen from ZipDebt.com for being on the show. And this is an absolutely fantastic show I've been waiting to do because so much of what Charles has done in the marketplace to help consumers resolve debt emulates what CRN has done, and actually you'll find out here shortly enough that Charles and I have worked together over the years. So Charles, thanks for being here.
Michael, thanks for having me on the show. Good to be hanging out with you today. It's pretty good technology. It's my first time doing a hangout, so it's interesting to see how it works. And
it's an awesome medium. Yeah, you bet.
Yeah, it's great.
So listen, Charles, debt settlement companies need people. They need to enroll people because that's how they're going to make their money. And in that effort, they've done an exceptional job, some over the top, to the extent of fabricating things, and trying to instill this notion that people who want to settle their debt, that want to avoid bankruptcy, actually need a debt settlement company. You and I both know that's wrong. What's your response to the way debt settlement companies try and instill fear and how they need a company to help them settle their debt?
Well, there's hype in the presentation. One of the biggest things that I take issue with is that debt settlement companies always try to convince the consumer that if they hire a professional negotiator, they're just going to get a better deal than they would if they were doing it on their own. The problem with that is, of course, it ignores the fact that they're charging really high fees. So, even if it were true, which it isn't, the consumer is going to end up paying more out of their own pocket anyway by the time you add, 15% of the debt or 25% of the savings or whatever they're charging. And the fact of the matter is it's just simply not true. What I tell people over and over and over again is that debt settlement is something that the consumer can do on their own, because it's a mechanical process. Every one of these major creditors has something like a conveyor belt. It's a collection. And when you default, you're on that conveyor belt, and that leads to settlement automatically. It's programmed into the collection process. It's the creditors that are the ones that want to do the settling. So when you hire a debt settlement company, you're under the illusion that you're hiring somebody that has this magic Rolodex, and they're going to be able to call, a special guy at a desk at Chase Bank or whatever and get a kill. The reality is that deal is going to happen anyway. The consumer can take advantage of that on their own. What they need is somebody to help them take the fear out of it, the uncertainty, the doubt that comes with, wading right in. And of course, that's what I've tried to do with the training course and the coaching that I provide.
So you're very unique. In fact, when I met you, you're probably the only person out there doing what you did, and I really want to make that known to anybody watching the show, anybody that later watches this video, is that you were kind of a pioneer. I've always, and you know this because I joke about it with you, but I call you the granddaddy of the DIY debt settlement movement. But you didn't start off with, oh, you know what, debt settlement works, I'm going to write this course and I'm going to train people how to do it effectively on their own.
Right.
You have a different kind of background, still debt settlement. Tell us a little bit about that and what led you into why and this principle since 2004 of showing people how to do for themselves.
You bet. I mean, I go back to 1997. Actually, so I don't claim to have invented it or been the guy that was the first one out there doing it, but there's very few people in the industry that have been at it longer than I have. So I started out in '97 doing what I call, where I'm basically just sitting down at the local table with the consumer here in the San Diego area, and I would take on a small roster of clients and help them negotiate, and I was a professional negotiator for them well before we got into the do-it-yourself concept. And then, of course, as you know, debt settlement really started to take off. It became big nationally right around 2000. I was part of one of the first companies to go national, became senior vice president of operations. So I've seen it, an attempt to scale it up to the big time. But a lot of things in the early part of the decade, and one of the things that really soured me on that approach was the shift from charging the fee after the negotiation to loading the fee up on the front end. And that really rubbed people the wrong way. I kind of resisted that big time, and it led, to my exit to going back to solo practice. But what really made the light bulb go on for me was that when I was part of a large company, we would see this time and time again. Back in those days, creditors were just send an offer in the mail to a client. We still see that today, but not with as much consistency as we did back in the day. So I was having embarrassing conversation after conversation with my minute. Here I am, I hired you 4 months ago, and I got this letter from the bank saying they'll take 40 cents on the dollar. What do I need to pay your fee for? And I had a really hard time, convincing people to earn that fee. And so it sort of was a light bulb moment for me. And after I left the industry, I tried to figure out whether I should go back into regular practice. But then I thought, consumers, and it's not that I invented it. I was one of the first people doing this on a systematic basis, but people have been settling their own debts for decades. It's not rocket science. It's called, and really that's all that there is to it. So what I found was that what people want is they don't want a book or a course, even though I feel I have a very good course that I provide people. What they wanted was a coach. They wanted somebody to kind of take their hand and lead them through the process of debt settlement, and that's what I've perfected, is a system that's coaching with a course involved, which saves me a whole lot of repetition of saying the same thing over and over again. And it's been very, very effective. I challenge anybody else in the traditional settlement industry to match my track record.
So this is getting into some really good stuff that I want to hit on, and some of our history working together. So it was, for me, when I was out researching, and some of the history, but some of the viewers wouldn't.
Right.
Back in 2004, I, as a kind of a grassroots effort, and I thought, hey, we're the only ones doing this, because I wasn't as aware of all of the players in the market. We wanted to educate people. We wanted to show people what they could do for themselves with some coaching, and recognize that coaching attribute. And as that model and that grassroots effort progressed, it was time to put together our own material. And it was in that research, out looking for information, DIY, debt settlement, and the like, where I came across your website, and I reached out to you, and we hit it off from day one. And as a result of that, Consumer Recovery Network, for many years, we actually used your kit, the Debt Settlement Success Seminar, and branded it with your permission and an agreement. And that's what our members used for, gosh, what, 5 years? Extremely successfully. So, and I know you had probably, an hour's worth of stories or a day's worth of stories of what people's experience with that course material is. But that's coming from you. I want the viewers to understand that working with consumers to do their own debt settlement better than they could do, and getting better deals on their own than they can usually get even from hiring a professional, saving a bundle in fees, being out of debt much quicker than would have otherwise been possible. I mean, look, we've worked with attorneys. We've had, this is CRN, and I know you've had many different kind of clients as well. We've had, a homemaker, all the way to blue-collar workers, to attorneys, very active attorneys. They just don't specialize in this area of dealing with creditors. And anything and everything in between, anybody from every walk of life, from somebody with an $8,000 debt load all the way to our largest file, I think, was about $470,000 worth of credit card debt up. Real estate investor, commercial real estate investor that went bust during the housing downturn. And resoundingly, in fact, most of the testimonies that you might see on our site still today are a result, when they talk about the kit, you can read those testimonies on the CRN site, they're actually talking about your work, about your education that you put together. Yeah, and you just can't make an improvement on it. People, and in fact, I think haven't you found even some former clients that have tried to duplicate some of your work and pass it off, as they're an expert? Yeah, that's
Yeah.
how good your stuff is. It trains people so well that they
Yeah,
actually
thanks a
are
lot.
proficient.
I've
Yeah.
had clients come through the program, and all of a sudden I find that, a year later they're the expert and they're going to help people, and they've basically taken my stuff and, changed it up a little bit, signed their name to it. I've had it. They say imitation's the sincerest form of flattery, but if you're on the receiving end of it, you might not think that. But yeah, it's happened commonly. I've had my ebook, rewritten. I even had one guy basically copy my entire business model and put his name on it and try to go after the same people, promoting. That's just competition. That's just business. I just overlook that. What most of those people don't realize is how it is. You have to be dedicated to do this. To be a coach, you have to be there for people. You know this from your own effort. You have to be there constantly, and you have to be able to give them the right information. Pressure, and if you have a heavy workload, it can be a lot. So being a workaholic helps a little bit, being able to deal with a heavy client load, and to be able to be straight with people is I feel is very, very important. I don't sugarcoat anything. I tell people on the front end, this is what you're up against with debt settlement. These are the pros and cons. So I've never had knock on wood, I've never had a single complaint to the Better Business Bureau in the entire time I've been in the industry.
And that's unique in and of itself. A lot of folks out there are never going to know some of the industry ins and outs and everything like that. But when you offer what's often termed as a problematic industry, the BBB itself calls it that, and to maintain no complaints, an A rating, and serve as many people as you have, I mean that in itself is an accomplishment. I want to share a few other things that people may not be aware of about your kit.
Sure.
I think you're on your third or fourth printing?
Well, it depends how I count them. It's the second version that I recorded, completely rewrote the material, but I do it to the workbook every couple of years or so. So it's the second recorded version, but probably the fourth or fifth update to the workbook.
So it's so solid. I'm going to share this little tidbit because I think it's relevant. I participated, as you know, in the telemarketing sales rule promulgation, as just providing public comments, and invited as a panelist to DC back when those things were going on in 2009.
Right.
And I provided earlier the first workshop. I took several of your kits, branded to CRN. And I distributed them to people that actually care about this issue and care about protecting consumers. And some of these folks had already seen it, and there's actually some awareness built from that effort, or some of my prior outreach grassroots kind of efforts. One of the follow-up comments that I did with the Federal Trade Commission, it included just a couple of excerpts of emails that I'd gotten back from people about working with CRN, or specifically the course. One of them said, and it was a woman in Florida, that, and I'm not going to quote this verbatim, but just in general, was that she appreciated the material. I think she had 5 accounts, and she was able to get one knocked down on her own, and because the material was so thorough, she didn't need us anymore for our ongoing support, which is fine. We want that. And that she felt very confident about moving forward with her other 4 creditors on her own. And that's exactly, that's just, again, I can't speak well. There's not enough I could do to encourage people to go to zipdebt.com, if they're considering debt settlement, get your course. Even if they just start at the basic level, it's beyond affordable. Just that investment alone, very small investment, will save you thousands. And effectively be able to do much of this, and then of course work with a coach, because that's the real value, is knowing the real-time data, what to shoot for, what creditors are doing, because that fluctuates.
Exactly.
But just start out there. So if you want to talk to, or if you could talk to this question, over the years, debt settlement has gotten this, because of bad actors in the industry and the front-loaded fees that caused you to leave the industry. There's this messaging from people that compete with debt settlement. Maybe it's credit counseling, maybe it's bankruptcy attorneys, whatever it is. But because there's so many good examples of how bad a debt settlement company or a debt settlement salesperson can
Yeah.
be, it's hard to argue with this whole debt settlement's a scam thing. Well, it's not a scam. It actually works quite effectively, but people are willing to scam people. So with all that
Sure.
negative messaging out there, I mean, what's your take on that? What would you do to distill the fact that, look, it's not debt settlement, it's who you work with that scams people? What's your response?
Well, what I'd respond initially with is let's take a look at who's a good fit for debt settlement, because I think a big part of the problem with the industry is the fact that it's been oversold, it's been over-promoted. Back when I got started, the pitch, if you want to call it that, was that debt settlement was a way to avoid bankruptcy. But there was no distinction made between filing Chapter 7 versus filing Chapter 13. And as you know, those are two completely different things as far as the consumer's perspective. Under Chapter 7, the debt's wiped out completely, and they pay the cost of the filing plus the attorney fee in a matter of months. So Chapter 7 bankruptcy remains the lowest cost, fastest solution for the consumer who qualifies for it, which about 70% of bankruptcy filers still qualify. It's the other type of bankruptcy where I feel debt settlement comes into play, and I don't think the industry would have had anywhere near the negative image that it's garnered over the recent years if it as an option, an alternative to Chapter 13. Because if you look at Chapter 13, we're talking about 3 to 5 year plans, typically 5 years now after they changed the law in '05. And that's torture for the average consumer. Aside from the fact that the high failure rate continues with Chapter 13, about 2 out of 3 people don't complete those plans, it gives up a lot of control financially on the consumer side, and they're basically under the supervision of the court trustee. So I argue, look, if your situation is bad enough that you're considering bankruptcy, and you would be stuck with the Chapter 13 flavor of bankruptcy, well then, and it makes well to look at debt settlement as Plan A. If you have any shot at all of coming up with the resources that you need to fast track the settlement process, where the companies get in trouble is they try to stretch these 4 and 5 years. I've had people tell me they were quoted 89-month debt settlement programs, to use an extreme example. I mean, come on, that's crazy. That's past the statute of limitations in most states. To get the payment down to hook the consumer in, especially back in the day when they were charging all the fees up front. But we still see a lot of long, stretched out quotes because they're just trying to bring business in the door. And the average creditor is going to wait 3 or 4 years to get paid. So the lawsuits get out of control. That tends to push the consumer back toward bankruptcy, but now they're upset because they've spent money over here on fees or on settlements unnecessarily. So if we funnel it down to who's a good fit, then it's a question of the fact that the banks are the ones that want to settle. There's nothing evil about debt settlement. It's the banks that want to settle. All you have to do is know what the differences are from Bank A to Bank B, how to go about it, and how to work the system, how to be on that conveyor belt, I call it, of collections without getting knocked off of it. Because if you step back, you're going to get settlements. They're mechanical. They just get spit out of the other side. There's some tricks to the trade. That's what I teach people, but we're not talking rocket science here.
So in the context of some of the messaging that gets out there about debt settlements, whether it's a sensationalization or a lot of hype from a sales guy that wants to enroll people and get a commission, or the other side of the coin where people are talking it down, one of the identifiers, and I knew this right out of the gate when we first met, is you have a very strict what they call underwriting, but who you think should even try debt settlements. Not with you or anybody else. This is not for you if you cannot do it in X number of months. And at the time, you were probably the most strict who you thought settlement would be approved for, and you'd actually turn business away. And that it was 12 months. Do you still keep that same time frame?
Yeah, I really do try to stick with the 12 months or less. Of course, I make exceptions from time to time. If I'm dealing with a client, for instance, out of the great state of Texas, where there's no wage garnishment down there and there's no way to practically lien a lot less collection litigation in that state, a couple of other states that have non-garnishment features. So I'm certainly willing to make exceptions in some cases. But the argument I would make is you're looking at debt settlement an option to the Chapter 13, which is typically going to stretch over 5 years. So if you start taking 3 and 4 years, you're really kind of diminishing the effectiveness of the solution against Chapter 13, a bunch of risk that you don't have under Chapter 13. But I really do try to get people to fast track it. If I look at my data, somewhere around 80% of the settlements that clients negotiate happen within what I call phase 1 of the collection process, which is the first 6 months that leads up to charge-off. So we get about 80% of our settlements negotiated prior to that charge-off deadline, and the rest fall into the post-charge-off phase, what I call phase 2, where the original creditor still owns the account, but they're trying to collect through an outside agency. Very few of our debts make it all the way to phase 3, which is the debt purchasing phase. And I would argue that's probably where a lot of the settlements in the settlement industry are taking place, is in the later phase 2, phase 3. So they're at inflated balances and a lot more risk to the consumer. By fast tracking a lot of the growth of the debt that might happen over a 2, 3, 4 year period, with some of these lenders retroactively inflating the balance if they buy the account from an original creditor. And it's just works a lot less stress because they're in and out of the process faster, and they get their life back that much more quickly. So I really, put a friendly pressure on people, to come up with the money, find it handled, and it's much more effective, and they're in and out quickly. So yeah, I'm still trying to stick with the 12-month or less parameter, and but I take it case by case, and if somebody creditors and they're in a good state, we may agree to go longer. But generally, the faster the better. You want to get in and get out of Dodge before the shooting starts, man.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Get out of Dodge and get out of harm's way and move on with your life, because that's really what this whole solution, settling with creditors when you can't afford to keep your payments current. That's what it's about. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So on your website, there is a ton of information, a ton. And one of the things that you do that many won't do and probably can't do, because it would tell the truth to people that their stuff don't work, you publish a lot of your data. You talk about how much litigation occurs with clients out of your database, and it's exceptionally small, as any company that operates the way yours or mine has. So you've got real dynamic numbers. People can really get a feel for what you're about, what the process is about, what the likelihood of their success is using your material, using your coaching, and the style. What we're talking about is finishing quickly and all the things and keeping you out of harm's way. You're one of the few guys that puts all that out on their website. So are you working on anything right now that you want to, do you have any projects going that you're building out for the website, any additional tools that you're going to be putting up there?
I wouldn't say I'm building additional tools, but I'm always writing content because, people are hungry for good information that gives them enough to go off and research the issue, or it gives them an understanding they might not get just from a quick article on ezine.com or something like that. The most recent project that I did was a series of posts which I posted on my blog, the ZipDebt blog. You can get to that. Just go to zipdebt.com, and in the upper right there's a link to the blog section of the website. And I've been writing for years on the blog, so there's a ton of content there. But the most recent project was a series of articles I wrote called the Myths, the DIY Myths of Debt Settlement. It's a projected 10 total. I've written 9 of the 10 posts, and they're all up there and available over the last few months. I've got one more to write to complete the series, and designed to give people the information they need to sort of counter that marketing message coming from the traditional industry at large that we were talking about earlier. Let me just give you one example of one of the one of the objections that people have is, I don't think I have the time to handle these negotiations on my own. You've heard that one a couple times, I'm sure. Yeah. So, just masking fear that the consumer has, because they have this misunderstanding that they're going to be on the phone, every 5 minutes for the next year to get this resolved. Well, the system that I teach, what we do basically is screen those calls to voicemail jail, in the form of a trap number, and then we call the creditor back only about twice a month, let's say. So let's take an example of like a single credit card out of a group, $10,000 balance. You know, the client might have to call that creditor twice a month for a few months, a few extra phone calls when they're actually getting some haggling going. So 15 phone calls over 6 months to get the account settled, and maybe 20 minutes average, which is probably too long, but let's say be conservative. So we're talking about 5 hours of talk time to balance, and let's say they get a typical 30% settlement. So if they save $7,000 for 5 hours worth of effort, that's $1,400 an hour. I'm pretty sure they're not making that right now, what they're doing. So I would argue you can't afford not to do it yourself. You're going to make more money by doing it yourself than you possibly ever could, you know, going to work at whatever it is you're doing now. So you have the time. And so this is one out of the 10 myths that we run into all the time. And it's because people are afraid. They don't understand. It's new territory, but they can be coached. If you just get a little help, you don't have to pay a fortune. Just get some help and you can be successful if you're a good fit for it in the first place.
Awesome. So listen, I want to put a wrap on this with this,
Sure.
and it's just a further testament to having worked with your course materials, having worked with consumers, navigating their way through the process, using your debt settlement success seminar as their foundation. And it's kind of a metric that we know from the CRN database that over 70%, actually it's 76.4 the last time the numbers were done, and that's last year, but 76.4% of the accounts that are marked settled in the CRN database were done by people themselves. We had a hybrid approach, and you know, we wanted people to do DIY, but we get that they can't or won't for whatever reason, so we step in.
Right.
So we give them the two options, and out of those two, I mean, look, that's a huge proportion that are able to do this on their own. They signed up with us with the expectation that, oh, well, I'll get CRN to do it because they charge the lowest fee in the industry. But what they ended up doing was not paying us anything because your material is that good and this does work. And I want people to know that. I want people to find you on the internet, and I hope they really got some information from you and got to know you a little bit throughout this video. Anything you want to close with?
Well, sure. I would just invite people to come by the zipdebt.com. You know, there's a ton of content on there, and I put a lot of information out there. I answer questions on the blog. So I do a lot of work, you know, pro bono, if you want to use that term, just in blog. So people are welcome. Come by, kick the tires, you know, read the information that I have there. Not everybody's a fit for this approach. And if you're really wondering about whether it's a good fit for you or not, you can download a report that's free on the website. I promise I won't spam you with a bunch of email if you download it. There's also another report for people that have really high balances. I wrote a separate report for people that have up 100K and up. You know, that might be the small business owner or the consumer that got in really deep for, you know, whatever reason. So there's a lot of information there that will help people make the decision whether to go farther or not, and offset some of the junk that they're going to hear in terms of the websites that are out there and the sales pitch. You know, don't fall for the sales pitch. Come on by to ZipDebt and feel free to request a free 20-minute consultation with me if you really want to talk to me in person and find out if it's a good fit. I'll be straight up with you and tell you whether it's going to fit or not, because I don't, the way I joke about it, I don't charge enough unless you're going to be successful. My fee is success. I want you to be successful, and I've structured it that way. You know, if I don't think it's a fit, I'll tell you that straight up. If it is, I'll tell you what I think it's going to take in order to get the job done, and what the likely outcome is going to be. Straight answer without sugarcoating or sales pitch. Feel free to stop on by ZipDebt.
Awesome. And what people also may need to know or want to know, and they'll find out when they go to your website, if you still offer this, but it's just unheard of. You offer a 12-month money-back guarantee. I mean, there's really not much to lose there and a lot to gain.
Absolutely. Yep. I don't get too many of them back, but hey, every once in a while somebody starts out on this path and they decide to go the bankruptcy route instead, and I don't want people to be out of pocket if I'm not going to do the work. So We don't get too many refunds, but I want people to have that peace of mind, and I think that's a big factor. That there's so many scams nowadays. People need that assurance that they're going to be taken care of, and that they can get a refund if things don't work out the way they intended. But that's just there, as something that I offer, and people can take advantage of it if they go another way. But what I want people to do is decide up front if they're really a good fit for this before they go down that road. And that way, success is going to have a good outcome. This is life-changing. If debt settlement works for you, it'll change your life. And I've been able to teach people how to negotiate, come out the other side, and good luck to the cars to do that.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks again for being here. And actually, I'm excited for another show that we're going to do. Not sure when we're going to get to it, but on a totally different topic, financially related. So I want people to stay tuned to the Debt Bites YouTube channel for the next interview with Charles on some other heavy-hitting information. Thanks, Charles, for joining me today.
Thanks for the invite, Michael. Good talking
Awesome.
to you live. All right, take care.